thank you all very, very much for being here. I'm very excited to talk to you about this topic. Before I do, I just kind of want to give you a little bit more about who I am and maybe a little bit about why this topic is important to me. In 2015, I was a student completing my PhD at the University of Florida, and my dissertation was focused on 18 and 19-year-olds and their responses to a wide variety of adults, so parents, teachers, supervisors, and police. So I was already in a space where I was very interested about resistance to authority, behavioral responses, and so on. But when I finally looked at my data, what was dissatisfying to me while I was having the world enveloped in this conversation about resistance, and not just young adults and youth, but all people's responses to authority figures, I realized that I didn't really have a lot of African American representation in my data set. That's very common. When you think about 13% of our nation is basically made up of individuals who identify as African American, then you can start to realize that in order to really get deeper into that, I developed a new study. And so I was very lucky. I was supported when I came here to the University of New Haven in 2015, later that year. I was lucky to win a grant. I pivoted the research that I had been doing for my dissertation into a very specific psychological framework. So we're going to be talking about decision making today. We're going to be talking about what does it look like to put people for study purposes in certain situations so that you can better understand how they do and will respond, right? So today our topic is titled Manipulating Black Young Adults' Responses to Orders During Traffic Stops. Not on. The first thing that I'm posing to you is why study traffic stops. When I first studied resistance to authority, it wasn't in the framework of traffic stops. But the reality is that traffic stops are a perfect interaction point when you're wanting to look at specifically interactions with police officers. Otherwise, you may be dealing with people who are passing by police officers. You might have different levels of interactions, but a traffic stop normally has a specific procedure, and although it varies from state to state, there's certain expectabilities about what happens during a traffic stop, right? And so specifically, not only do we have this interaction, but we have this decision point. And so if you're being pulled over by the police officer, are you going to agree with the orders and respond by complying? Or are there other options? Are you going to be something that I'll nuance for you that's called deference, and something that I'll nuance for you called defiance? Most importantly, as I mentioned to you, traffic stops are really where most commonly involuntary interactions with the police take place, right? So when we look at the data most recently produced by the United States Department of Justice, the Police Public Contact Survey from 2011 shows us many things. One, when we look at contact, involuntary contact most commonly is happening through traffic stops. But then also, I'm going to explain it to you because clearly you can't see everything that's happening here, but it's showing you that of these individuals who said that they were part of a traffic stop, more than 80% of them said that they believed that the police behaved properly, right? And so it's saying, and it's showing us that in general, police are behaving properly. People are having positive interactions with police. Although there might be media conversations and specific instances that are creating a variety of opinions from people, when we look at our data and we look at what is the prevalence of opinion, more than likely people, even people who were stopped, were saying that they felt like police officers behaved properly. So that sets this framework where we have to say to ourselves, but why? Why am I seeing something different among my peers? Why is the conversation different? Why is the exposure and the conversation in social media different? So it forces me to ask the question, well, why study Black young adults specifically? Right? And I pose that for you in two different reasons. One, I'm very interested in young adults. My reason for being here at the University of New Haven is my expertise in youth and young adults. I work for the Tao Youth Justice Institute here in our state, trying to impact juvenile justice reform as well as reform for young adults. But why Black young adults specifically? This is a face of a young man who is presumably being pulled over, right? Imagine what is going through his mind, and imagine how if he's anything like me, then for years now he's had to deal with imagery of what happens during a traffic stop, regardless of whether it is real or not. The imagery is still pervasive, right? So the idea of, am I safe? Do I know the right thing to do? Do I have the right, if I don't feel like the officer is correct, to do something about myself or do something to defend myself? The reality of the situation is hashtag Sandra Bland, hashtag Jeremy Reed, Hashtag Devin Guilford. Hashtag Sam Du Bois. These are just some of the names that came out in the 2015, 2016 time, where the media, really through social media, began to have a much stronger conversation about, is there a specific racial dynamic about how some people are perceiving or even actually experiencing traffic stops? Black Lives Matter. I can't breathe. If I die in police custody, say her name. Once again, constant narratives were invading me as I was studying something very, very, very sterilely, right? It's very important when you're at the top of your scholarship and you're an academician to be very neutral. So I really had to buffer myself as I was studying this for my dissertation to say really purposely, because the purpose of my dissertation is what theories were predictive of certain behavioral responses. It wasn't about how races are different. It wasn't about any of that conversation. And it wasn't even focused specifically on just police. I'm a CJ major, so it involved police, but my juvenile justice lens brought me into conversations of many others. So here I'm now focused on that police interaction. And it forces me to ask you, like I've asked myself, how can we better understand responses during traffic stops? One of the features of being an academic is we want to put labels to things. We want to figure out, well, is there already a nomenclature or taxonomy that helps us figure out how things are happening or differentiate why things happen one way or why they happen another, or even put language to the behavior. What is that? What would I call that if I saw it, right? I developed through my dissertation, and I've further nuanced in other work, what is this flow, right, this figure? And it really is breaking down that I believe that really in an interaction with a traffic stop, my main focus is what happens if you disagree? So the very first question that I pose in each instance of my participants is, here you've been asked to do something, do you agree with it or not? Because you could completely agree with it. Can I see your license? Okay, I know I was speeding. I don't really have that, you're doing your job. That puts us in the space of compliance. I receive that order, and if I agree with it, I'm going to obey it. That lands me in compliance. But what happens if I'm not in agreement, right? This is where there is a lot more murkiness. This is where there's really a lot of fodder for study. If I am in a disagreement, it is unclear sometimes what is my right to be in that disagreement, right? What I have distinguished is if in that disagreement, I still obey, so I defer to you. That is what I'm calling deference, right? So we have a power dynamic, and I am going to let your power dynamic supersede my power dynamic, and I am still going to comply with the thing that you asked me to do, even though I would not do it if you had not asked me to do it. Right? This is something that we'll talk more about as we see the different responses in the survey. And then lastly, there's defiance. I think the value in differentiating the layers and responses in defiance is really, sometimes we think about defiance as particularly and intrinsically criminal. But what is my right to disagree and not comply? That is unclear, right? What are the layers of the options for me? What are the particular frameworks in where people feel like some things are acceptable and some things are not acceptable? Even the word defiance probably strikes a very negative tone. But what if it's my duty? Like what if I should tell the person who's asking me something to do that I'm not willing to do what it is they're asking me? Maybe I have a higher authority besides, that authority. Maybe I have a duty to my country, or maybe I have a duty to my job. And so even though my immediate supervisor or the person who has direct authority over me is encouraging certain behaviors, I have to take into consideration whether or not I actually want to do those things. So first, I'm going to break down for you more about those deferential responses. The point here is that you're in an interaction, so we're framing that interaction in a traffic stop, and then if you happen to disagree with the orders that come through a traffic stop, what are the options that you have for yourself? You can completely obey the order without a question. So even though you disagree, you don't have to say anything to anyone. You never have to reveal the disagreement. Think about how many times this happens, right? And especially when I developed this framework, once again, the study wasn't just particular to police. It was about how you deal with your parents, how you deal with your teachers, how you deal with your supervisors. You do not have time in the real world to express every time that you have a disagreement, because then it just stops the flow of work. So there are plenty of times where I'm asked to do something, I never even acknowledge that I disagree with it. You've asked me to do it, you have the authority. I'm a resource and a tool to do as you've asked me to do. I'm going to completely do it. But there are other things I could do, right? I could still obey the order, but I could show some minuscule disagreement. So I'm not in complete agreement. I'm doing it, but boy, can you see that I'm dragging my feet while I'm doing it. So I haven't actually engaged in any sort of disagreement with you, but you can tell from some sort of body language or some sort of utterance that we are not on the same accord. So the difference really between 1 and 2 is that I am at least showing to some extent that I am in disagreement. And then 3, I'm going to do what you tell me to do, but you have to know that I don't want to do it. You have to know that this is me wanting you to know that I'm deferring. Sure, I'll do what you told me to do, but just know that if this was my decision, I wouldn't do it this way. These are the options that I'm saying I'm articulating as deference. So the point here is that even when you disagree, how do we better understand what are those options? These are what we might consider positive options, right? Then there's defiance. So 1, we're in that interaction. 2, we're in the disagreement, but now I am no longer willing to comply. But what does non-compliance look like? What are the options and the frameworks in which that is possible? So here's what I decided. It's possible to disagree, but you're not verbally objecting. You're just letting it wash on off your back. You're just letting it flow. So someone has told you to do something that you disagree with, but you're just going to ignore the officer's order when he or she leaves. This is something that we see commonly with noise violations. So I have my music up, I'm at the car wash, someone comes and tells me to turn my car music down. I'm waiting on that person to leave. I might turn it down for some amount of time, but does it actually result in my full compliance? Am I actually willing to turn off or down my music? Possibly not. These are in escalation, right? So there's ignoring you, and there could be consequences to any of these actions, right? Because I'm not complying, and when I'm not complying, by most definitions, I'm resisting, especially when I'm dealing with a police officer. So I have not turned down my music, and now I've engaged in an oral debate. My music's not even that loud. I'm still not turning down my music, but this is the behavior that I'm choosing to emit. This is the communication that I'm going with. Telling the officer that you would report she or he for the order. So this is really you appealing to a higher authority. This is like when mom tells you to go and clean your room, and you go and tell dad that mom told you to clean your room, and dad told you that your room was clean yesterday, and you're telling mom that you're going to tell dad that she's overstepping what he told you to do. Wait a minute, what? This is really just about appealing to someone else, just saying that really this isn't the end-all be-all of the authority dynamic. Yes, there's you, and yes, there's me, and I'm a subordinate, and you're a superior, but you have superiors too, or you have someone that you have to answer to as well. And so I am willing to take that up. Verbalizing a mild threat to an officer. So this is about letting the officer know that even though they have what is the legal authority, even though they have what is the power dynamic in the situation, that you might try and get them back covertly, and that basically whatever the interaction is and whatever the positivity or negativity of that interaction is not going to end with this immediacy, right? I'm going to get you later. So you still have to, but then realize that this is much different. This is in terms of escalation. Before, I was in a righteous position. I'm right, and someone else is going to help you realize that I'm right. Now I'm telling you that it's not about that. I think I'm right, and I'm going to make you realize that I'm right. You're going to pay for the fact that we had this disagreement and that you're asking this of me. Next, I could show my disagreement in some physical way without touching. What I have here for number 5 and number 6, they are both about physicality. But the touching part is what distinguishes between 5 and 6. The reason why we really articulated these are because we wanted to be able to operate in a behavioral framework. So if I was doing what was a qualitative study and I was doing like a ride-along, I wanted to be able to tell my research assistants, here's what you are looking for. Did you see this? This is the behavior that you're looking for, not just the label. So not just did you feel that person was defiant, but here are the ranges. Did you see that person comply or not? And if that request is not in compliance, then what really was the range of behavior? We also wanted to distinguish. There's a distinct difference between physically disagreeing when you want to make yourself big, when you want to stand up because you're angry, when you want to block the doorway, when you want to clench your fist. That is still different than step 4, right? So me telling you that I'm going to threaten you versus me moving into something that you actually might feel is threatening. Then the next step, the final step, 6, is me actually touching you. Most things in literature about conflict says that at the point in time where it becomes physical, it's going to escalate, right? And so this just allows us to nuance and allows us to see the purpose of this study, the purpose of our conversation today is we're going to talk about the people in this, that participated in our study. We're going to talk about the responses that they gave as we put them in particular contexts so that we can really see were people acknowledging the potential to actually engage in these ranges of behavior. Another potential benefit is maybe now when you're dealing with interactions, you'll think more to yourself about, well, what is this? Was I compliant? Was I deferential? Was I defiant? You might even become okay with the fact of being defiant, right? One of the examples that I give is when we think about Guantanamo Bay and when we prosecuted the officers at Guantanamo Bay, the main thing that they said was that they were doing exactly as they were told by their superior officers, right? That's an instance where we wish they had been defiant. Like that's an instance where we were saying to them, we wish you had not listened to your authority figure and we wish that you had done something, either appealed to someone else or debated with them about it. This also allows us to get into certain contexts about, well, when are people ever going to feel like it's okay to get into these physical interactions, right? It just allows us to kind of nuance things. And it provides us a specific space, not just to study the citizen, but to continue and also study the officer at later points as well. Before I move into the actual methodology, any questions about just deference and defiance in general? As I mentioned to you, the framework here is we're in an interaction. So people have asked me, well, what is it called when I'm doing something against the law and there's no one there, right? When I am speeding, right? When I am littering, when I am doing things and there's not that interactional authority, that is what I define as non-compliance. So you are aware that it is not a compliant action, but you're not actually having an interaction in which to be fully compliant. For my study, I used what was an online questionnaire. So I surveyed people using the internet, and I used what was a software called Qualtrics Software Suite. So this allowed me to do all types of tinkering to try and make the survey as accessible as I could to people. The survey actually was administered, meaning reached people through crowdsourcing and a snowball approach. So this was something that was really, really unique. In general, crowdsourcing and snowballing are not unique, but the idea of incorporating this into a research methodology is something that's becoming more and more new. So what I did was I basically created various frameworks, imagery that could be shared through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and I then promoted it. So I became basically patient zero. So people who knew me received it either through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, then they continue to Twitter and post it all over the world, right? And so I limited my survey participants to people who had to be 18 to 25. I also needed them to live within the United States. So they were screened out if they didn't live within the United States. Why is that important? Whenever you're studying a legal context, you always have to have a geographical boundary because our laws change from place to place. I was willing to study anywhere within the United States, right? You also had to identify as Black. I distinguished between Black and African American, and I purposely chose to sample Blacks. So that meant anyone who identified as Black, that's all I asked you. Do you identify as Black? It was not my job to be the Black police or the Black gatekeeper. Honestly, racial dynamics are so nuanced, are so dynamic. Who is really anyone to tell someone what they are? It's a debatable thing, right? And so anyone who felt like they were Black, as long as they acknowledged themselves as Black, they were allowed to participate in my study. Notice that is different than African American because that means that you're a person of African American descent versus people who are part of the Black diaspora. If you're having what is a genuinely racial experience where someone is treating you away because you are Black, they might not know that you're this or that. They just know that they identify you as Black. Or if you feel Black, meaning you identify in the Black diaspora and something is happening that creates a sentiment, you're offended because either there has been a shooting or there has been a protest or there has been things that have happened. It doesn't matter to you if people don't identify you as Black, even though you're having what is a extremely emotional experience, right? So what we did, this survey, we snowballed, we crowdsourced, we reached people for about 6 days. I collected over 480 responses from people in less than a week. I released this survey on a Sunday, and I almost didn't release it because there was a shooting on Saturday. And I really had to say to myself, is the community am I about to traumatize my own community? Like, I am from St. Louis, Missouri, so I am from Ferguson, Missouri. So I already have my timeline is already sensitive to these conversations, a lot of them, right? And so when I talk to my friends, they say, well, you'll be waiting forever to release your survey if you're trying to wait for a moment where there's enough healing, where then people are not potentially reactive. And what we made sure we did is we put a question at the end of the survey where we allowed people to debrief us on if they felt like there was some recent events that had provoked certain responses from them, because we were asking them about what they would do. So overall, we had 637 different access points to the survey. When you were in the survey, because it was online, there are things that would kick you out. So the first thing that would kick you out was, of course, the screeners. So if you did not identify as Black, if you did not identify as 18 to 25, if you did not identify as living in the United States, when you reached those questions, you were thanked and you were removed from the survey. But there was also what is called an instructional manipulation check. So one of the issues when you do an online survey is, how do you know that those people aren't robots? How do you know that those people aren't just clickers and moving through the survey? You really can never know 100% for sure, but one of the mechanisms that is a safeguard is, well, let's put a question in and let's put specific instructions in the question, so that if a person is trying to just move quickly, they will miss the instructions that tell them not to answer the question as normally. There's only one answer that will allow them to move through. So I had 2 instructional manipulation checks. So if you passed the first instructional manipulation check, you weren't shown the second. If you failed the first manipulation check, you were shown the second, and anyone who failed the second manipulation check was not allowed to stay in the survey. So that is where we lost some people here. We also had what was final manipulation checks. So one of the things that I'll talk to you about is the design of the survey and some of the things that I manipulated in the vignette, and talk to you more about that vignette. Basically, we changed some pieces of the story, and we wanted to know if you were sensitive about those pieces, and I'll talk to you more about that in a second. These are the vignettes, this is the breakdown of the vignettes, right? So what is a vignette first? A vignette is basically a fictional story. So what I used was a psychological paradigm where you offer people a fictional story, you ask them to make decisions in that story. So mine was a progressive narrative. So as opposed to just being shown one story and then you get asked an array of questions, you literally, it was like Goosebumps. You picked your own destiny, and as you decided whether or not you were willing to comply or defer or defy, then people who continued to comply moved further in the study, and people who were defiant eventually fell out of the study. So the real question and outcome that we were looking at here is, how far would people make it? Like, how intrusive of a traffic stop are people going to be okay with? And then you can just see, based on the 12 different conditions that people saw, they either were presented with an officer who was Black or white. They were presented with an officer who was male or female. They were presented with an officer who had a positive, negative, or neutral demeanor. So these things were manipulated for a few reasons. One, most commonly in the literature, is a conversation about these citizens' behavior. What is it that we should do so that citizens better comply during these interactions? And there's not as much conversation about what is it that we might do to better train officers, or what is it that the officer is potentially bringing into the interaction that might impact what is happening, right? So we can see in the literature there's conversation about how people respond based on different races or different genders, but this was also an opportunity to kind of bring that all together. In my analysis, as I mentioned to you, I had manipulation checks. So I, at the end, wanted to know, were you sensitive to what type of officer I asked you about? So you clearly knew you were being asked about an officer because the whole framework was in a traffic stop. But were you sensitive enough to pick up on the fact that I was reiterating to you that the officer was a certain gender or was a certain race? Or did you pick up that the officer was acting positively, negatively, or neutral? First, let me say, in order to capture the demeanor, what we did was, so neutral was clear. That means we just didn't add any specific language to try and attempt to be positive or negative. But in the positive demeanor, we purposefully, what we had was an opportunity to explain ourselves. So we'd make the request, the officer would make the request in the vignette. But then if you said no, the officer, can I get you to comply? That was a nice type thing. So that was I'm trying to promote safety. I'm trying to get us, it was a group consideration and value type of dynamic that officer was portraying, versus the officer in the negative demeanor was very much clearly articulating a disadvantage to themselves. So you're wasting my time, you're potentially putting me at harm's risk, So the officer was clearly in the negative instance concerned solely about his or herself, to whereas the officer in the positive instance had what was a more global concern, like I'm here doing my job, keeping us safe. About these participants, right? So, as I mentioned to you, all of the participants were Black young adults, but just so that you can see, here is a breakdown of it. This might as well be a study of Black male adults. I don't know what it was about my sampling approach, but what you can see here is that nearly 90% of my sample is male, right? So I have only 50 females in my sample once I have removed people who either didn't make it past the instructional manipulation checks or who didn't make it past what were the final manipulation checks. Do you identify Hispanic or Latino? I had a strong representation of Hispanics that I have never seen in any of the surveys that I have done in person. And so I had what was 66% of my sample saying that they identified as Hispanic. When I looked at how many years old you were, most commonly people reported that they were 20 years old or 23 years old or 24 years old, right? We can see that this 18 to 25 had good variability to it. It wasn't just limited to individuals who were 18, 19, and 20. It wasn't just limited to people who were 23, 24, 25. One of the things that was interesting is that I am not in this age group. So when I first sent out the survey, one of the comments that I received from many people was, should I take the survey? I'm not in the age range. And so in the beginning of the survey was very, very, very strong language about what harm you would cause to the research project if you lied just for participation's sake, and that the research project was specifically focused on this age group so that we can understand developmental differences as well as generational differences. We wanted to look specifically in this group because of what the literature is saying the value of studying them is. We also looked at what were some other factors, right? What were their living situation? What was their SES? The greater majority of my sample was living alone. This is very surprising based on the literature and discussion of those who are in this age bracket. More than other generations, people who are currently millennials are living at home. They are living with roommates. They are living with others. So I found it very interesting that 91% of my sample lived alone. I also saw that for the most part, many of them, 62% of them, lived in urban areas, and that the majority of them identified as middle class. When I started to look through what were my demographics and various, personal characteristics, I could see the potential that maybe I had as an influence as patient zero in my own snowball sampling. So I began to think to myself, in terms of next steps, what are things that I could do so that I would have less of an influence on who would come into the sample? So what my concern became is, what you can see here is 24% of my sample says that they have a college degree, but over 50% of my sample says that they have a doctoral degree. It makes me realize to some extent, well, one, there could also be flaws in the survey. There's always sampling error. There's always the opportunity for people to lie. But when I think about the crowdsourcing and crowdsourcing coming from me, and then the crowdsourcing going on my Facebook and my Twitter and my Instagram, I've been in school for like 20 years. So everyone around me is either someone who's in school or someone who is a professor, or, and so they probably reached not that many degrees further to, position themselves. This is very interesting when you look at the representation of Black academics in terms of PhDs. This is not the number that you're seeing, and so my sample seems to be different than what we would expect from the general emerging adult pool, because they are more highly educated and they are more independent. Do you have a job? The majority of my sample said that they worked 40 or more hours a week. Before we begin our traffic stop, I'd like you to just think to yourself, who do you imagine, what do you imagine? Who do you imagine is the officer who is pulling you over? What is his or her race? What is his or her gender? What is his or her demeanor? Right? Do you have something that's in your mind? Do you have what you think of as most common when you think of an officer? And then, is it that you're imagining someone who looks like yourself? And then if you're a Black young adult who took this survey, did they have the luxury of imagining someone who looks like themselves? If you're a Black male, as the majority of our survey was, right? If you're a Black female, which some of our participants were. And then also, just interestingly, what other officer characteristics come into play during a traffic stop. I didn't study officer age, but that's something that is very interesting, right? Age always comes into play during authority dynamics. If you're older and I'm younger, then I feel like you're superior and I'm subordinate in many occasions, right? I didn't capture anything like charisma or personality. I just kind of captured like whether or not you were helpful or not helpful in that positive, negative demeanor. But there are many other things that could be investigated in terms of looking at how officer characteristics is a space to study this police-citizen interaction, as opposed to just looking at what the citizen has done that creates a response from the officer. During our traffic stop, during our vignette, we are going to have 5 different decisions that we are going to make. First request is that we show our license, right? This is pretty much how traffic stops begin. The way that I set up the vignette was basically letting people know that they were driving their car. The vignette says that, you know, you're trying to make it home and you were just about to turn the radio station because the song wasn't one that you liked and you rolled through a yellow light. And so it clearly sets the framework that you have broken the law, but that it was not necessarily malicious or intentional on your part, but that you still have, I mean, traffic stops are about you violated traffic law. It's not about are you a bad person. It's not about are you mean. It's not about whether you dislike or like the police. So when you first get stopped, the first thing that you're most likely to be asked to do, or one of the first things, is to show your license. One of the things that you might also be allowed to do is, can I search your trunk? Are you going to allow me to engage in some sort of search? So are you going to step outside your vehicle? So this is me, if I'm the officer, escalating my domain of control. So I don't want you to be somewhere where I can't control you completely. I'd like you to exit your vehicle so that I am more in control. Now that you're out of your vehicle, you're your own entity. Can I search you? Can I search you and your pockets, your purse, whatever you're physically carrying? You're your own entity, right? And then lastly, can you step out of the way? Can you sit on the ground while I continue my search, while I either complete my paperwork or whether I look around your car? I want you to assume what is a more subordinate position while I am engaging, right? So the reason why I put these 5 steps together is multi-pronged. One, I wanted to make certain things normal, right? Certain things are expected when you go through a traffic stop. One of the things that has come up in the media, and that like even I've been talking with some of my colleagues about, is when is the proper point to educate people about their rights during a traffic stop? People are clearly confused. People clearly don't know what to do. We've seen people say, I don't have to give you my license. Well, actually on the back of your license it says that you do if you're driving a vehicle. Like, that is your privilege, right? So the other reason why I pick these things is because based on where you are state by state, many of them have nothing to do with the traffic stop. So yes, you should show me your license, but the evidence of you violating the traffic law is not in your trunk. So I don't really have a right to ask you to search your trunk, right? Will you step out of the vehicle? This is something that differs from state to state. I've lived in states where if you get pulled over, you have to get out of your car and into the officer's car. That is that's the protocol to maintain the safety of the officer. So if you're not from that state, this seems like a very strange request from you. I guarantee you, I was from that state. It still felt like a very strange request to me. When you're young and you're being pulled over for the first time, once again, who teaches you what are the proper responses? Who teaches you what are the dynamics and what's acceptable? Allow search of self. Once again, this has nothing to do with the evidence of you and your traffic stop, but it does speak to whether or not the officer might feel that you're potentially a suspect or that you are potentially some sort of threat. And so they're going to, once again, double check their safety and then sit on the ground. This is the safest thing that I could do, is have you sit in plain sight outside of your vehicle, so I don't have to worry about are you driving away. I don't have to worry about are you having access to something that's either in your glove box or somewhere in your car. So once again, this is allowing me to have what is the highest potential authority and control in what is the situation. So yes, as I mentioned to you, in the vignette, people were told to imagine themselves having been almost home, which is the worst time, right? When you're almost somewhere, anywhere, not just home, and then you get pulled over and you're thinking to yourself, well, how long is this going to take? Should I just be most compliant so that everything goes well, or not? So I'm just going to read you the intro so that you can fully grasp what it is that I set the framework for people. Today has been a bright and sunny day. As you're driving home, you happily think to yourself about the things you accomplished today and start making a mental list of the things you still have to complete. Your mind wanders and you take a deep breath. The sun is setting and it's getting dark fast. You glance quickly at the clock and realize that there is just enough time to make it home before your favorite TV show airs. You turn up your music and you increase your speed to make it home in time. When the song changes, your focus goes to controlling the radio, and while distracted by finding the next good song, you fail to notice that the yellow light you just flew through turned red before you had cleared it. You just ran a red light. Moments later, flashing lights appear in your rearview mirror and sirens from the local police car are signaling you to pull over to the side of the road. You pull over and turn off the car. As you look about to see who else is around, you look in your side view mirror and notice that the police officer, this is when you first learn if the police officer is black or is the police officer is female, getting out of the car with a slight scowl. This is when you first learn if the police officer is positive, negative, or neutral, slight scowl versus a smile, and no other mention. The officer signals you to roll down your window and begins to ask you a few questions. So now I will talk to you about the findings in terms of responses that people offered during the vignettes, right? And I'm going to talk to you about really, one, I've lumped them together, so I'm not distinguishing them based on their 12 conditions, because when I looked at people's ability to pass my manipulations and their ability to literally pass all of them, only a third of my sample passed all 3 of my manipulations. So that means that I have to go now and distinguish between whether people who did and didn't pass manipulations are actually significantly different, right? And then make other methodological choices. But for our presentation today, the simplest thing is to just walk you through how people experience the vignette. The first request, we asked people to show their license. We see here that 99% of people were compliant. This makes sense. Why would I disagree with showing my license? As I mentioned to you, if you're considering not showing your license, this is not a good idea. This is normally something that is expected of everyone, right? So we had just really one person at the end show that they were unwilling to comply. We had 4 people, we had 5 people originally say no. So this first question is just, do you disagree? At the point in time where you say no, that's what puts you into the options of deference and defiance. So this is the breakdown then of those people who deferred and defied. So the majority of people deferred. They said that they'd show their license. They said that they would calmly verbalize their objections. Of the individuals who said that they would disagree, they said they were just going to ignore the requests, which doesn't work that well because the officer's not going to go anywhere, right? Telling the officer that you would report a complaint, right? So just looking at what things people felt like were viable options for them as they were expressing what were the potential responses that they would give. Now we're once again moving more intrusively. You're still in your car, you're stopped, but now I want to know, can I search your trunk? It's just a friendly question. You could say yes or no. Are you going to allow me to search your trunk? At the very first request, we saw that 93% of our sample complied. So we're still seeing high compliance at this point in time. Can you search my trunk? Sure, you can search my trunk. Honestly, I don't have anything in my trunk. If you can find something in my trunk, that might be good for me, right? But these 34 people who said no, these are people who then either deferred or defied, right? So we had what was 9 people who were deferential and 25 people who said that they would defy. Of the people who were deferential, they said that they would allow the officer to search their trunk without any question, but then most commonly they said that they would verbalize their objection. So they don't agree with it, and they're going to communicate with the officer that they're not certain that this is what should be happening, right? Of the individuals who want to actually defy, 4 of them said that they're going to ignore, right? 6 of them said that they are going to engage in an argument. So we're going to have verbal words about whether or not why do you want to search my trunk? So I'm not going to just allow you to search my trunk. I am going to now have a much more expressive and overt disagreement with you. 15, so what was 60% of the people who defied, 60% of them said that they would tell the officer that they're going to report a complaint. So notice what we're seeing, right? The reporting a complaint becomes an important option. So do people understand where they can report complaints? When those reports go in, do they result in any sort of action? That could be next layer conversations and questions that we could further study. Request 3, right? Now we're seeing a little bit more resistance in the conversation. So we have what is only 38% of our sample saying that they're willing to get out of their car. In the vignette, I already told them that they were on the way home, so maybe this makes them less willing to get out of their car because they were trying to make it to that TV show, and you know how much we care about those things, right? So we can see that 38% are complying, 58% almost are not complying. So we've reached a point where we're no longer saying the majority of the group is willing to acquiesce. And now we're going to say to ourselves, well, what does this look like? What really is happening here? Of the individuals who said that they would defer, the majority of them said that they're just going to get out of the car without any question. So the point here, in terms of looking at it and acknowledging, right, their opinion and their responses, is that they're willing to do it. They just don't agree with the fact that they had to do it. So we saw 285 individuals defer, and 5 of them originally defied. One of the things that I did in this study, I implemented what was a framework called Foot in the Door. Foot in the Door is a psychological framework that says, well, if you make a smaller request and you get someone to acquiesce to it, then they're more likely to comply with larger requests. So that's one of the reasons why the requests are smaller and then larger and then larger. Also, what we're looking at is that, well, if people say no and we give them a good reason, if we give them additional information, then are they going to change their mind? So what we saw was, of the 5 people who originally defied, 4 of them changed their mind. And so we ended up recapturing people by giving them additional information. It also speaks to that point, people wanting to know more, right? So there's an idea where you could just tell me something, but if I'm concerned about my safety, if I'm concerned about your intent, then a little bit more goes a long way in certain instances. In terms of people who defied, right? So I mentioned to you, these 5 people were our original defiers. 4 of them eventually changed their mind once we asked them again and gave them more information. But of those originally who defied, the range of responses, they wanted to ignore, they wanted to argue. 2 of them said that they would report the complaint, but now we're seeing another layer of escalation. Now one of them is saying, well, you know what, I am willing to show some disagreement. So if I'm going to get out of the car, it's not because they asked me to get out of the car, but maybe I'm going to roll up the window. Maybe I'm going to do something that's physical that shows my disagreement, but that isn't about actually touching them. This is the first time, right, in our escalation that we're seeing that movement toward physical. And it speaks to where are people's boundaries? Where is that conversation of acceptability and unacceptability and expectation? If I'm an officer, where are my expectations for what the person's going to do? How well am I willing to respond to if a person starts to do anything that is resistant to me or anything that is in the realm of physical? So if I'm an officer and you start rolling up the window, this is not a good sign for me that we are maintaining what is the power and dynamic of control that is expected in a traffic stop. So then that leads me to potentially take some actions, right? Request 4, right? Once again, allow search of yourself, your pockets, your pocketbook, etc. What we see here, will you allow us to search you? Okay. These people have already said that they would allow us to search their trunk. They have said that they've given us their license. They've stepped out of their car. Now will we allow them to search us, right? The 90% of people said yes. 90% of people said yes. When we look at the individuals who said no, so we had 11 people who wanted to defer. They said that yes, you could search without question. They said that they would grumble. Many more of them said that they are going to communicate what is this dissatisfaction with having to comply. I'm still going to comply, but I don't like it, and I'm willing to tell you about it. We see 14 people telling us that they are going to operate defiantly, right? And so that's them saying that they are going to ignore. That's them saying they're going to argue. That's them saying that they are going to give a complaint. This is still the most common thing in terms of individuals who want not to obey, they want a proper option to acknowledge that they don't feel like they have to obey. It's not that many of them are saying, well, I just want to wild up and hit someone and run away with my car. They're saying, well, what is the proper thing to do if I am being asked to basically subject myself to authority that I don't agree they're asking me things I should do? They want to be able to file complaints. But then we do see people, we have 2 people here that said that one of them would show disagreement at that non-physical level. But then we also, for the first time, see that someone's saying that, you know what, this is a thing that would make me feel like I have to do something to potentially defend myself. If you're going to search me, then I am going to show disagreement by physically touching. I'm going to block, I'm going to grab, I'm going to pull away, right? And so any sort of physical contact really, and I use this term very loosely, right? So it at no point said that you attack the officer. It just said that physical contact was made and that you are not being deferential or compliant. Request number 5, sit on the ground. So you're out of your car, you've allowed me to search your pockets. Now will you assume a more subordinate position? We had what was 80% of the sample say that they would go ahead and sit on the ground. And 70 individuals, 14% said that they would need to, they would not. They would need to defer or defy, right? Deferential and defiant responses for request number 5. Would you proceed by going without any question? Some said they would. More commonly, people said that they still want to communicate those objections. So once again, when we look at what are the most common responses for people who are wanting to be deferential, there are plenty of people who are saying they're willing to just do it without objection, but people are also acknowledging that there is that communication. Maybe if I communicate that I disagree, it will create some changes in the situation. Maybe if I tell you that I'm uncomfortable, maybe if I tell you that I'm afraid, maybe if I tell you something, and that communication, that might be an important piece of what we communicate with citizens about how they are communicating with officers. In terms of defiance, once again, individuals saying that they would ignore, individuals saying that they would report a complaint. No individuals saying that they would escalate any further than a complaint. What I missed when I showed you here, in addition to questions about what people would do, there was a whole nother section where we asked people about whether or not they felt confident, right? So whether or not they had the legal right to say no. And so let me just go back for a quick second so that you can see in each one. Here in request 1, 80.5% of our respondents said that they felt like they had the right to say no. So even though many of them said yes, this was them saying that they felt pretty clear that they could say no, which is interesting because this is the main thing that you can't say no to. Right? So then, much smaller, a third of our sample reported that they felt like they could say no to having someone search their trunk, right? This makes sense because this was the thing that really created the most negative response out of the individuals. We had people for the most part allow them to search their trunk. It was the next thing that caused it. So people said they knew that they couldn't say no for the most part. Here, in terms of stepping outside your vehicle, even fewer percentage of our people felt like they could say no. At the point in time where the conversation is about a traffic stop, these are things that in many instances you can express like what, but then really this is why it gets so confusing, and this is why it's so important to have these conversations at the state level, because you're dealing with your state or your local law enforcement. This isn't a federal conversation. So what are the laws that you're actually dealing with in your municipality in terms of whether or not you have to get out of your car? But if you are in a place where you don't have to get out of your car, that's something, you know, that raises importance. Allowing someone to search your cell. 40% say that they felt like they could say no. There is no evidence of my traffic stop on my body. So we no longer have the same Terry stops. And so if you pull me over because of a traffic violation or because of some sort of instance where I was speeding or there's an issue with my car, that is what we were supposed to resolve. And we've seen various rulings come down in the past few years that have made it more difficult, meaning have restricted what officers can do in the traffic stop. So I can't keep you just for random times. I have to really be dealing with business. I can't hold you just so that a drug dog can come. Like, these are things that we've seen courts intercede in so that they are really trying to create levels of protection, but then also procedures so that officers understand what is a valid search and what they are doing. Lastly, here, what we had is 31.4% of our participants saying that they had the legal right to say no to our final request that they sit on the ground. I also have some post-stop reflection questions, right? So things that we ask participants that were additionally of interest. We asked them, how confident are you in general that you know your rights during a traffic stop? Right? So that's different than the question that we asked them. We asked them specifically about each instance and each request, whether or not they felt like they could have, whether or not they had the right to say no to that request. This is a more general question about just, do you feel confident? And what you can see here is that somewhat and completely confident, more than 400 of my 497 participants said that they feel like they know what is happening. Honestly, I feel like if I asked you, like, how confident are you about what you know about a traffic stop? Most of us feel like traffic stops are very commonplace. There are so many things that are supposed to happen. But this also begs the question and requires more research. Do people know what to do when they feel like the traffic stop isn't going well? Right? That's a different question, and that's something that I think that I will spend more time looking into. I asked very specifically about discrimination, right? Did you feel like the officer was racist? 34% of my sample said that they felt like the officer was racist. right? And so, as I mentioned to you, I nuanced whether people saw a black officer, a white officer, a female officer, a male officer. And so my additional analyses will allow me to see, are there people from specific people, were black people who saw white people the people who identified the police as racist, or was there other dynamics that we need to look into? We asked them, do you think the officer was sexist, right? 79.7% of my sample says that the officers were sexist. This is very interesting because normally when we talk about sexism, we're talking about women who feel discriminated against men. But as I mentioned to you, my sample is majority male, right? So this requires further investigation. Who are these individuals who felt like it was sexist? What vignette were they shown? What is it that is creating, are there differences? Are there not differences? We also asked people about whether or not we asked them about what influence they felt like the police had in their lives. So, are you feeling in general like the police are a positive or a negative influence? And what we can see here is that many people felt like the police were having a positive influence. Minor positive influence as opposed to major positive influence, but some positive influence as opposed to not a positive influence. That means that for the most part, my sample is showing that there is value in police-citizen interactions, there is value in police officers and their work, and that they are seeing that. There then also is voice and agency. I asked two questions that I'm going to share with you about voice and agency. When you think about the interaction, do you feel like you would have been able to vocalize your concerns to the police? So, I'm afraid because it's dark. I'm afraid because I'm alone. I'm afraid because you're big and I'm small. Whatever those concerns are. I'm afraid because I have a criminal history and I don't want, you to see that I have a criminal history and then for you to be nervous and for us to then have what is a negative interaction. And so, what was interesting here is that the majority answer is that they felt like they would have a small chance, right? So we had nearly 71% of our samples say that there's a small chance that so in terms of our looking at, well, what does this mean for training? What does this mean for police-citizen interactions? Do we want our citizens to be able to vocalize their concerns? Is that not something that we would think would help maintain everyone's safety? If I'm afraid and you don't know it, and then I do something that you feel is erratic as a citizen, then neither of us are really going to maintain a safe space. You and the police would have been able to arrive at an outcome together, right? So, I'm going to get a ticket, I'm not going to get a ticket, I wasn't speeding, we were speeding. Do we get to have a conversation about it, right? Am I a participant in what is the outcome here? Or am I just someone who has to receive what happens, right? That was what we asked them. And so they felt like they had almost no chance. 57.5% of the sample said they did not perceive themselves as being a contributor to the outcome, as having a voice, as having some sort of sway in what was happening there, right? Honestly, many people don't have much sway in what happens in a traffic stop. There are a lot of factors. It depends on where you are, maybe in that officer's day. It depends on what you say and what you offer to that officer. And so in this instance, our people did not express that they felt voice and agency in this way. So in conclusion, right, every study has limitations. And so the big picture here is that while this is a fantastic study in the sense that it allows us to talk with over 400, nearly 500 black young adults between the ages of 18 to 25, the fact is that there are discrepancies in what we would expect between what is the sample. And so it's very informative because the sample doesn't exist, and the sampling approach, while it is not ideal, there are very few other ways that you can think to reach 18 to 25-year-olds. 18 to 25-year-olds are not among the group that is most likely to be registered and therefore on a voting register, therefore to sample them from a voting register. They could be enrolled in school, right? But then I would have limited my sample to only individuals who was enrolled in school, and I wanted to also make myself available to individuals who were in any sort of frame of life, right? Data collected was right after an actual event that happened and that was receiving national attention. The summer, we consider in the prevention field, Labor Day to Memorial Day to Labor Day to be the 100 days of danger in summer, right? These are the days where teenagers are most in danger, where they're most likely to get in car accidents, where shootings are most likely to happen. And so it did not occur to me, nor did I have the luxury of really holding my release of my study any longer. I had no idea how fast the data collection was going to take place. So like I mentioned to you, I released this data on a Sunday at around 7 p.m. And on Thursday at 8 p.m. I took a nap and woke up at 9 p.m. and 15 more people than I had designed to pay had taken my survey. Also, traffic rules. Traffic rules are going to vary from state to state. So I took information about what state you're in, and I could potentially control for that, in later analyses. What are my next steps? I didn't share it with you today because there's so much in this data set, but the next steps are to move forward with predictive analyses, specifically with theories. As was mentioned in my introduction, I'm a person who loves criminological theory. I got to study under some great theorists while at the University of Florida, and so I have measures, all 4 core measures of social learning theory are in this. So I have differential association, differential reinforcement, definitions favorable, imitation modeling. I also have procedural justice theory. So procedural justice would ask us to ask you whether or not you believe police behave properly. But in addition to procedural justice, we also have measures of distributive justice. So that's outcome-based. Do you believe that the outcome was fair? And then we also have what we're calling substantive justice. Do you believe that the police should have had this level of authority in the situation? Like, what is your opinion basically about the discretion that police officers have? We also have captured measures of deterrence theory. So we're looking at whether or not you feel like there is going to be swiftness and certainty in punishment, as well as whether or not you feel like there are benefits that come from your resistant or defiant behavior. Then lastly, there are a lot of outcome variables here. So I share with you the vignette, and so the clearest outcome is how people move through the vignette. Did they comply, right? Did they defer? Did they defy? But this study also very specifically asked people about their actual defiance. So I asked people in the last 6 months, what are the even just frameworks of interaction? Have you been in a traffic stop? Have you been a suspect? Have you been someone who had to report a crime? And all of these various ways that you come into action. How many disagreements have you had? Of those disagreements, how many times did you actually use any of these particular behaviors that you can identify? So there's analyses that allow us to actually delve into actual behaviors, self-reported behaviors, versus the vignette, which forces us to be in a framework of what would you do based on the context. I would like to just give some special thanks and acknowledgement. First, as I mentioned to you, this was an award from the American Psychology Law Society. I was awarded $4,800 to do this study. This allowed me to pay 480 people $10 to complete my survey. And then, as I mentioned to you, there are more people than 480 in my survey. I paid those people myself. I would, of course, like to thank my colleagues in criminal justice at the University of New Haven, as well as at the University of Florida. It has really been interesting to have conversations about what is either the theoretical framework as well as the practical sense of this information. Like, what is the usefulness of this, either to police training, even to community conversations that would allow people to feel like they better understand what their rights are, or how to advocate for themselves if they feel like something is not going well. My own academic advisor, Lanlanza Caduce, because he poured all of his knowledge and wisdom into me. And then, of course, my undergraduate and graduate students, because they're always so helpful. And then, of course, are there any questions that we have? Yes?
Do you think the fact that a majority of your participants were, I would say, like highly to moderately educated had a big influence? So let's say, for instance, if you were to propose this survey again, but to more of a low class income area, let's say inner city.
So I do have similar concerns with you in the sense that if I was, my concern particularly is, am I in areas that are more policed or not, right? And so if I am someone who is attending so specifically to my education, then am I in more protected areas? So colleges are more protected areas. Graduate schools are even more protected areas. But then at the same time, I can't help but think about Henry Louis Gates. Me being very affluent or me being educated doesn't stop the actual fear and the interactions that could take place. And so to some extent, I think it impacts the realities of what what is the actual reality that they would have the opportunity to implement these behaviors. But I don't think it actually changes what they think they would do, like what they feel like their instinct would be in the scenario.
Okay, so you don't think that the fact that a survey versus real life, that you don't think that would differentiate their opinion?
No, so I do think that there is a difference between asking people what they would do and asking people what they have actually done. What I'm saying is that in terms of what I would do, me saying what I would do as an educated person does not change when you don't know that I'm educated, is my point. You don't walk up to me unless you're actually in an academic environment and say, oh, I know that's Dr. Cooper. I could be, you don't know who I am. And so to some extent, that's what I mean when I say it doesn't impact me. Henry Louis Gates was at his own house miles away from Harvard, and that did not stop all of these police from coming and thinking that he was breaking into his own house. And so that's what I mean when I say, in terms of what I would think, in terms of what my instinct would be, my instinct is because of how I think people are perceiving me, not because of my actual status.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I had heard something about wait time, like how long the officer waits for a response or just pummels you with questions, that made a difference with people's responses. Have you seen anything on that?
I have not heard that. So all I would say there is that, you know, in general, like I mentioned, although traffic stops are this most common point of involuntary interaction, many people go years without being stopped by a traffic stop. And so what then that actually happens is many times people are then in that emotional franticness. And so is this happening how it happened on TV last night? Is kind of what people are digesting, which isn't real. Or am I going to be the next person on social media? And more surprisingly, and not surprisingly, but what we're also seeing in the conversation now is police officers are also having their own level of fear. Mm-hmm. So to whereas there's been this conversation and a really promotion of media because really minorities are saying people are not seeing and are understanding our experience and how it might be different based on our racial experience, police officers are also legitimately saying, well, we've seen those videos and we don't want to be the person. And there's not always clarity in how to not be that person. How do I not, you know, create an instance, because I can be good-natured and a person could still be afraid and then they do something that I have to maintain control. Like as an officer, I'm trying to focus on safety and I'm trying to focus on law. And so it really isn't that easy to tell the difference between a person who's nervous because they know someone who just had a bad incident versus someone who's actually much sketchier, right? And so as an officer, I don't have the luxury of guessing my safety or your safety to always figure those things out. Yes.
I read that you're a certified prevention professional. Could you tell us a little bit about what you do in that?
Yes. So in 2011, I graduated from the University of Florida with my master's degree, and at that point in time, I began working as a coalition coordinator in the community. So I worked for a local community coalition that was focused on reducing youth substance abuse, as well as I worked on a grant to minimize binge drinking on a college campus. Through that work, I was then nominated and was selected as a national ambassador for the Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America. So I went through a wealth of training, including like in-person training in like Indiantown, Pennsylvania, where I went, and this is where they train your SWAT drug teams and all of these other places, and so that I could learn more about drugs, but then also all other frameworks of prevention. So teen suicide, substance use, teen pregnancy, so anything that deals within that prevention space is of interest to me. And I have then gone and gotten what was the intermediate as well as the higher level. So I started off as a certified prevention specialist, and then I have graduated and have the credential now as a certified prevention professional. It's an international credential that I have to maintain like CEUs and all these types of trainings. Basically, it just puts me in a paradigm where I'm always asking, how could this have not happened? What is the prevention? You know, and so that's why all throughout my talk I spoke about, well, what is the training? What is the community conversation? Because I don't want to just be in the framework of bad things happen and then we have to deal with them. People are afraid, and that's reasonable. Law enforcement need to do their job, and that's reasonable, but there's a miscommunication going on. Like where this study became very, very clear to me is I held a panel of criminologists, and at the end of the panel, I was the chair. I turned to them and I said, you know, what advice do you have for people? And the guy turned to me, he said, after Sandra Bland, I don't. He said, you know, if you can be in your car and you could have just not turned on your blinker, he said, do you know how often I don't blink? He said, so now I have this kind of thing where I don't know what will happen. And so it just creates, you know, and the point is that whether or not that's real, right, whether or not that is actually the real and most prevalent situation that might happen to a person, that doesn't mean that the psychological threat or the perception that any time that they might be stopped and that they don't know what's going to happen is not, it's really impacting people. Are there any other questions? Oh, yes.
Given all of our knowledge now about adolescent development, I mean, it just makes you really concerned because young people are not going to necessarily understand. I mean, they even have gone to people's expressions. They see adults as being serious or angry, even when they may not be. So facial expression and demeanor and tone of voice and blurting out a phrase as opposed to asking a question in a full context. There's so many things that for a young person, it's like, how in the world are they supposed to know
Right.
how to respond?
Well, and then so I've been in conversations where it's like, well, young adults should do better. Like I've been in full panels with the chief of police and like young people should do better. Parents should train young people better. And I'm like, this is not the bread and butter of what young people do. Like young people are resistant. They are a defiant set of people. They do not like confrontation, especially in large groups. And so part of the conversation has to be like, if something's happening, maybe it is beneficial to ask you to get out of the car, because not because you're a threat, but because otherwise I won't get a non-threatening conversation with you. Do you know? But then how do I explain that to you? If you're afraid and you're in the car and your car feels like your last domain of control, and then you feel like by getting out of the car, the only thing next to happen is to potentially be assaulted or shot, then you've just created a framework for yourself where you're afraid. But the problem is that people aren't understanding each other. So I think there has to be a lot more space for officers and as well as other individuals who are in that diversion space to say, well, what is it that is happening with young people? What is the expectancy? What is, a sophisticated person can go ahead and defer and tell you that they object. A less sophisticated person is going to have some of those higher level escalations of defiance. So I'm going to threaten you, or I'm going to try and physically altercate with you. To your question, I would say that it isn't my education that I think that would make me much different. I think that education and wealth are tied together. So, to some extent, a person who has resources is going to feel like they can deal with the situation at a later date. Whereas a person who doesn't have resources, the idea that you're giving me a ticket, and then I have to go to court, and then I have to pay the fine, and so I need to fight you right now because I don't have other time. I'll be at work or I'll be missing work, and so I need to have this actual debate. Whereas the affluent and more educated conversation is always, don't engage with disagreements with police during the disagreement. Go to the next space where you're no longer comply first and then file the report, right? Is like the message but kids also are not long thinking. Kids are not able to always even have, firm consequences, nor do they have the same value system. So the idea of what is trouble and what is threatening and what is problematic to them is not the same thing.
Thank you very much, Dr.
Thank you.